Today we are on with Andrew Dicer. Andrew's a full stack developer from the Chicago, Illinois area. However, today you said you're in Springfield?
Yeah, I'm in Springfield, Missouri at the moment, but I reside in Chicago proper.
In Chicago. How long have you been in Chicago for again?
So I've been there for about a year now.
And you moved up there from the Florida area, if I recall correctly, where you were doing work for Disney, right?
Yes, I used to do the consumer insight marketing analytics for the Walt Disney Company in Orlando. So then
cool.
Yeah.
So let's get into that in more detail here in a little bit. But I'd like to get kind of your full background, maybe how you kind of meandered into programming. I know you've been programming as sort of a hobby for quite some time now, and have recently taken a turn towards the more professional side of things. So I'd love to hear about sort of how you got into that hobby, and maybe we'll sort of walk through that transition into through Disney and then into the more professional web development stuff.
Sure. So I picked up coding probably about we'll just say 15 years, even though it's probably a little bit more, but back in the early 2000s, HTML, this was even before CSS really, so it was just a lot of HTML stuff.
Right, yeah.
I had some friends who were into, C and C++ and all that stuff. I never really delved too much into it. I enjoyed the coding with the HTML. And then it was just kind of hobby. We'd play around. Someone would need a site. You would build a site. You'd find out magically that all of a sudden there's CSS. It's like, oh man, I can change how it looks on every page with this one page. This is amazing.
Right. I don't have to go in and manipulate everything just to change a font or a color.
Yeah, now my navigation bar can be the same on every page when I change it instead of.
I know. Site consistency is amazing.
Yep. So it was just kind of that kind of stuff. Watched how internet trends went from to things like all of a sudden I can't remember what it's called. So I watched how internet trends went from basic HTML and then went to I said it the other day. Why can't I remember now?
Through Dreamweaver, and were you into Dreamweaver?
Flash.
Oh yeah, you said
that's what.
Flash.
All right, I'm gonna start that sentence over. So just watched how things went from HTML to Flash to HTML3 and different things, PHP. And as that would come along, I would do different things. I would say my first real dive into coding was, like I said, it was all hobby stuff. So we would do some stuff in Visual Basic. We had a room called the Hacker Room where we would just sit there and write really dumb codes. So I wrote a code that basically just made it look like it was a screensaver for my computer, so that when my computer would go to sleep, it would just run this code across the screen that would look like I was hacking a bunch of different computers. So it was just really
scare people a little bit.
Well, it's just someone walks into the room. I remember people walk into the room in college and be like, "What's he doing?"
Yeah, he looks smart.
Yeah, it just it looked like I was cracking keys to things. It was fun.
Right.
But then did some PHP and some other stuff. So it was just always a hobby, just a lot of fun. And then I started working for Disney and doing a bunch of the data analytics stuff.
What year did you start with Disney?
This is around 2006. So I was there for 10 years.
Right.
So around 2006, I started working for Disney doing data analytics and a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of Excel spreadsheets, a lot of things that I would look at it and go, we could probably do this a little bit easier if we had some macros going on in here. And so I started doing that a little bit here and there for different projects, and was like, I kind of like this. This is something I could see myself doing professionally. I don't know why I haven't. And so after talking to my better half, we decided it was a good idea to take a full stack like a full stack web development bootcamp. So I did that, and the plan was to just kind of within Disney, transferring to a different side of that department that, sent out all of that stuff, dealt with the servers, dealt with all the front end
That's
stuff.
a little more technical.
But then, unfortunately, there was an illness in the family. We had to move to Chicago, and so since then, I've just been applying to different front end web development positions.
So I'm interested in hearing some more about Disney. I mean, you said you spent 10 years there.
Absolutely.
It wasn't all in Excel spreadsheets.
No, not at all. So the job there, the way I would put it is it's marketing analytics. So it was an in-house team. So anytime Disney wanted to know something specific, whether it be basic demographics, whether so we did quantitative, qualitative, we did focus groups, we did industrial engineering, like how long does it take people to get on and off of the trams when they are being taken from the parking lot like that kind of stuff, just anything and everything you could think of. We also had outside clients that wanted to work with Disney. So like a lot of things you see with Disney, like right now in Disney World, they're getting ready to open up the new Star Wars land at Hollywood Studios, and pretty much everything with Hollywood Studios that is changing. And a lot of that is based on just, talking to the guests, talking to the Disney guests, running them through different experiences.
And just quantifying all of that.
Yep, sitting them down, giving them a cookie, saying, how did you feel about this experience? Like there's a lot to do. And then also just like on a daily basis, knowing, your demographics from who's visiting from where, park patterns. So when you first come to Disney, do you go to Magic Kingdom first? Do you go to Hollywood Studios last? Do you not go to Hollywood Studios at all? When you're in Epcot, do you go to the World Showcase? Do you stay in Future World? Like all that stuff. It's just, you name it, we did it. So,
how long are you willing to wait in line?
Yeah, basically they would do. So I don't know how much you know about Disney, but at Epcot, one of the most popular rides at Disney is called Soarin'. And that line would consistently be 2 to 3 hours daily. So, Disney had a problem there because it just was kind of a bland line, nothing going on, nothing doing. And a lot of the newer Disney attractions, when they build them, they make the queues to be interactive and more. So you'll see different things to play around with when you go to the mine trains, for instance, at the Magic Kingdom. But so they did a bunch of, we just did a bunch of studies on how long it takes, what point in the line do people start to really get,
annoyed
out? Yeah. How we can improve the flow of that line. And then they ended up adding like a bunch of things to the line and other things. And
right.
That line now isn't even, I think because of the industrial engineering studies we did with it, we got the line to actually, so it's, that kind of stuff.
Gotta optimize those trams. So let's talk a little bit about the boot camp that you did. So
sure.
So what was the focus? I know a lot of boot camps are really JavaScript heavy, but I'm not sure. I think last time we spoke, it was a lot of Mongo, Express, React, Node. Was that the general?
It was everything. Idea? I mean, the way I would describe the boot camp I took. Am I allowed to say what boot camp I took? Is that a good?
Yeah.
So I took a Trilogy boot camp through the University of Central Florida. I really enjoyed it. It was a 6-month program, and they pretty much covered everything you would think of, starting with like HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript. Like baby's first loop. How everything works, that kind of stuff.
Right. And I mean, you already had a solid understanding of most.
Progressed on to more. Did you get most of that or no?
Yeah.
Okay. So it would go through that basic stuff first, and then to more of the high concept other side of it, introducing MySQL, how Node works, MongoDB, React. There was some PHP, some Laravel, some stuff like that. So they tried to hit, I think the motto or the, mission statement of the bootcamp is, here's what the industry is looking for right now, and we're trying to shape the class structure towards the things the industry is wanting right now, kind of thing. But it is on you to take it to that next step, learn how to use it functionally and professionally and that kind of stuff.
Right. I mean, you can only, I mean, throwing so much stuff at that wide variety of stuff at people in 6 months. I mean, there's no way people can learn that. I mean,
and if I didn't have the years of coding experience prior, I would have been a more of a struggle. And I definitely watched people struggle and tried to help people. It's one of those things. The class starts with 40 people and ends with 15. It's just some people, it's not what they think it is, and also the pace of it's just really I feel like you need to have a good base before you go into that stuff, just because once you have a week to figure something out, and then we're moving on. So right, and you're diving in, and it's so much information, and it can just hit you like a wall that like if you're not prepared for it, or you're just coming in with a total blank slate of programming. I mean, it really is about how much you can absorb and how much you can retain. Because, for example, when we went over Mongo, it was probably only 4 days, and then it was just like I took it and I was like,
you could spend a year on that.
Yeah, no, and there's still probably plenty for me to learn about most of these languages, and that's kind of the fun part for me. Is then you go, what is possible, what isn't possible? Because prior to the boot camp, which is one of the reasons I wanted to take the boot camp, I wanted to like refresh on what I knew and learn things I didn't. And one of the good things about the boot camp is like Mongo, I didn't know Mongo exists, or no SQL databases really were a thing now.
Right.
But with how everything's kind of shifted towards like object-oriented stuff, like Mongo makes a lot of sense, and I've really grown to like it and use it. It's fairly easy to understand, and I wouldn't have gotten that without. Maybe I would have found it. Maybe I would have found it through the the everyday searching for something to learn mentality. But it was nice to have that directed at me, taught to me, and then given the keys basically to drive the car wherever I want. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. I mean, I had a more traditional computer science, like college undergrad education, despite the fact that I dropped out. And I mean, we never touched NoSQL databases in any of our classes. It was all SQL. And in practice, I rarely, maybe once, used like an actual MySQL database. It's all been like denormalized NoSQL.
Well, it's the question becomes really like, do you really need an SQL database? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes you need that relationship. So you go for it, but other times, I feel like most times, especially for web development, I feel like NoSQL and like Mongo in particular, is just
especially when you're building things from scratch and you don't really know how the structure of the data is going to work prior to, and you're still kind of figuring out what exactly you need and what you need to do. I mean, just the flexibility of
the predeterminedness of SQL makes it a little bit harder, where with NoSQL you can be like, well, I didn't need this then, but I need it now, so we'll just throw it in.
Well, I think this is a good time to sort of transition into some more tech talk.
I guess I got a little too tech talky there.
No, I think it's all good. I mean, let's keep going on this sort of database wave we're riding here.
Sure.
Maybe talk. I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about SQL and NoSQL. I didn't know if you had more things you wanted to elaborate on them versus like the benefits and sort of disadvantages of each one, or we can kind of jump into maybe a little bit more Mongo type stuff.
So like, I think the difference between the main difference really between the two is just what you're going to use it for. NoSQLs can get a little bit big if you're not careful. So you gotta maintain that. The interesting thing about SQL, for like MySQL and stuff like that, to make it run better, it is more of, I guess they call it a vertical. What is it called? Oh, look. Oh, it's vertically scaled. Yeah. So it's more like vertically scaled. So you improve the hardware and it will run better. Whereas like, NoSQL is more add more servers and it will run better. So it's like horizontally scaled. So
Uh-huh.
like depending upon where your company is and what you're doing, that also could play part into whether or not you want an SQL or because maybe you don't have the space to add more servers, stuff like that. So maybe an SQL database is a better fit, that kind of thing.
Well, can you've worked mostly with Mongo, right? I mean, that was what your class was, and that's sort of what you've been building things in since then. Can you talk sort of about Mongo at a high level, maybe how it works, what you like, what you don't like about Mongo, and
Sure,
how
I'll
you.
do my best. So the way I would describe Mongo is that it's just very intuitive when you've been writing with JavaScript, because it's object based. It uses the CRUD format, which is nice. It gives you a simple way of getting everything and packaging everything. NoSQL databases are better for like JSON objects and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, they just fit right in.
Yeah, they just fall into place really. So I always like using it because I find it easier to separate out your controllers and your modals and all that stuff into. I just think it's really nice and simple way of setting up your database, and you can always go in. And there are some workarounds to make them a little bit more relationship-y, to get more of a relationship like database, but which aren't too hard, but I think that I would rather use an SQL. But Mongo, for everything that I've needed it for and what I use it for, does everything I want smoothly. So.
Cool, and it works well with sort of Node Express paradigm.
Yeah, so. I think that's the interesting thing about how everything's kind of gone here in the last maybe 5 years, and maybe we're working away from it at this point. I'm not sure, but how Node and JavaScript and Mongo and the whole object-oriented way of coding, it all flows together so seamlessly.
Right, and they sort of built themselves together in a little bit. I mean, you don't have to change. You used to hear LAMP stack, and now you hear MERN stack, which is
right. MERN is the typical. At least every time I look something, they're always talking about MERN stacks.
Right.
And I think it's nice because, for instance, using PHP and MySQL back in the day, I can think that like when I'm writing my PHP, I'm thinking one way, and then when I'm writing my PHP to communicate with the database, I'm thinking in another way. Whereas with how all this kind of flows together, my thought process and the way I code and all that stuff stays in one kind of general area. So it just, I'm not, like I'm on target the whole time, opposed to like having to rethink, okay, so this is how this is structured and wants to be talked to in this way. So the code has to look like this. Meanwhile, I want this to do this and it talks in a different way, so just all that's gone. And that's why I really like it.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about Node and Express here. Can you maybe just describe Node versus Express and talk about some of the differences in there, and or what is the main problem that sort of Node addresses? How is Node used in sort of the larger sort of MERN stack type ecosystem?
Let me see if I can think of how to answer that question. So I guess I would say the main thing it addresses, like, because Node is basically giving you the ability to use JavaScript outside of the browser, which opens the doors for a lot of back-end different things, which is kind of what we were talking about. And like the main thing Node does is it gives you that asynchronicity with callbacks or promises and stuff like that. So it allows you to continue to do one thing while waiting for the server to do others.
Right.
So, I mean, it's pretty much how that's how I would explain it. That's the main benefit for me, is that the two main benefits for me are that it allows me to keep coding in the manner that that I enjoy or that I understand. And then it also allows me to build on top of that front end stuff with a back end that works pretty seamlessly.
And Node's relationship to Express, how would you describe that?
I can't. I don't. I know I use Express. I download the Express npm and I use it all the time, but I'm not too sure how the two correlate. I know Express basically is, from my limited understanding. Let me see. I don't even know if I know it on a limited understanding, because Express is making all the connections.
Right.
I mean, that's my understanding. So you have to set up all the connections through Express.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where my knowledge of that.
Right. Maybe a better way to phrase that question is, if Express wasn't there, what would you do?
I don't know. I don't like. You would just have Node programs, I guess. I feel like Express. I feel like Express is so vital to communicating to the outside world. I guess you'd have to find a workaround.
So can you tell me a little bit about promises in Node? Promises versus callbacks and some of the benefits. I mean, you already talked about some of the benefits and some of the potential pitfalls, specifically with callbacks.
Promises are basically, I don't want to say simpler, but a different type of callback. One of the bonuses with promises is you can catch errors and stuff like that with them. Callbacks can get scary because you can get into like a callback pit, endless dark pit of callback after callback after callback after callback.
Right. Just nesting.
Yep, you're one inside the other, and it can get pretty out of control pretty quickly if you're not careful with what you're doing. I feel promises are a little bit better for catching that error, finding what's going on. If everything's fine. If everything's not fine, then you can find out right away from that callback, I think, or from that promise error. For example, is like when you're trying to connect to your backend API and you're trying to connect with Mongo and get that information, and it's not working. Having that error is really helpful to figure out, wait, where is this going wrong?
Yeah, having that spit back out at you and be able to handle that.
Without it, you're looking at the JavaScript information, and that's going to kind of generally point you in where this error lets you know specifically what's going on. Like this wasn't found, or this doesn't exist, or maybe there was a parse problem, and it'll let you know all that, which is super beneficial.
So how do you generally avoid things like too many nested callbacks, or callback hell, as it's known to be called?
I think the best way to avoid that is just to pseudocode as much as you can, and when you find out that,
turns out planning helps with programming.
Yes, plan, because what will happen is you'll see that you're running into that problem before you even start coding. You'll see that the way you're thinking about the problem isn't necessarily the right way to be thinking about it.
Right.
And it allows you, before you even start, to maybe rethink about how you want to get information, where you want to put that information. So I think that's probably the best way to avoid it, is to plan accordingly. If you start coding and you find out that if things aren't going according to plan, which also happens quite a bit, just be aware of where you're at and where you are in the situation, and that, because it's easy to go, well, if I just do another callback, we'll be fine. And then you go, well, if I just do another callback to there, that'll be fine. And you lose track of the fact that you're now 40 callbacks deep or something ridiculous.
Okay.
I can't imagine being 40 callbacks deep, but I bet that it's happened. And so stay aware while you're coding of what's going on. And then if you get to that point, also start just to rethink. I think it's how you code. If you code clean, you'll never want that many callbacks. Like if you're someone who's wanting to be able to look at a certain function or certain thing and know what's going on when you're looking at it, 40 callbacks is the easiest way to get lost. So
yeah,
I
I
think,
mean, and we'll get into this in a little bit when we're gonna pull up from the code you actually shared with me. But I mean, I know cleanliness is a big thing with you, and having things well visually organized.
yeah. I like to be able to see, and you know, that comes with the years of coding, and you know, going back to when you start and everything's all in one straight column and doesn't make any sense, and you get lost. Just you start to build your own little way of
patterns
coding.
and ways of doing things, and we can talk about more about that when we actually pull up.
I think that's important when it comes to avoiding callback hell, is to because once you start to get out of that pattern, you realize you're now entering dangerous territory. It's just all about, like I said, planning, being aware, and then if you get to that point where it is too much, trying to rethink the problem, trying to think of a more efficient way of doing it.
Pulling things apart and separating out the pieces and maybe putting them back together in a way that's a little bit more.
I think it might be hard for some
reasonable.
I think it might be hard for some people because the end goal is the code works.
Right.
And
yeah, but
a lot of callbacks, the code works.
It makes it work. But
for me, that's not quite how it is. I want the code to work, but I also want the code to be clean, efficient.
Right. When you're
as simple as possible. I want the simplest answer.
When you're writing code, you're talking to several people. You're talking to the computer, and the computer doesn't care how the code looks, doesn't care how readable it is. It just wants the logic to be correct.
It's either gonna say yay or nay.
Right. But then there's a much more subjective side to you have to be able to look at this code 6 months from now and be able to understand it perfectly. And then God knows somebody else has to be able to jump on the project and understand it immediately, or they're gonna waste days and days and days trying to look through your 40 nested callbacks trying to understand.
We've all been there. We've all been there where we've had to look at someone else's code and go, wait, where is this going?
It's like tromping through a swamp. You're like, I'm just covered in filth and I'm not getting anywhere.
Yeah, it's just it's looking for that one weird marker in the middle of the field.
Right. So let's jump into a little bit of React right now. So can you maybe describe React at a high level and sort of what's going on there, and maybe the main problem that it's sort of addressing?
Sure, I'll do my best. So React is more of a hold on, let me read my notes real quick. Okay. All right. So the way I've always used React and thought of React is it's a better way of handling the DOM. Like it's meant to handle the view area of the web page.
Mm-hmm.
And so once again, with DOM manipulation, by putting things into different states and allowing different components, then you can use them multiple times, and they have different life cycles. So whenever your component comes up, it will mount that component, and when it's done, it will unmount it, and then all that space and all that other stuff, it frees it up, which I think is very beneficial. It works well with a lot of things too. So if you, let's say, add a different thing, like one of the projects we're going to look at, I had to learn Socket.io and what it was capable of, but it works so great with React,
right,
to constantly be updating the state of the page. React really does a great job of continuously keeping the DOM updated to what you want quickly and efficiently, basically. Right,
and it does that in a really efficient way by only updating things that have actually changed. Instead of reloading everything.
That is the main thing. That instead of having to update everything, it updates the specific things that are changing.
One little color change.
Shopping carts, a shopping cart's a perfect example of that.
Right.
Where you want to show that something's been added to the shopping cart. You don't need to change everything else just because you're wanting to add a 1, to your shopping
versus
cart.
A 0.
Right. So Yeah, so that's one of the beauties, definitely one of the beauties of
like that big image over there doesn't need to be
Right.
reloaded. We can just reload this little thing over here. Yeah. Totally get it. So can you maybe dive a little bit deeper into the component lifecycle?
To my understanding, basically the life cycle of that component is from when it's called into the DOM by React. It will stay there and continue living, if you will, until you either leave the page or do something on that page that calls it off.
Hold on one sec. So let's maybe talk about sort of normal components versus pure functional components. Do you have any thoughts around that? And what are the benefits of things like pure functional components?
So normal components, if you will, are more based towards what React is based towards, which is manipulating the viewport and the DOM. Functional components, though, have their benefit as well. I mean, you'll find it in all JavaScript. Functional, like you can functionally take out a bit of code and then reuse it all over the place. Writing a functional code in React. Writing a functional code in React, I think, is definitely beneficial if you're going to be using it all over the place. The problem is if you're using it and having to tweak it all over the place, having that one component maybe necessarily isn't the best best use. But I think having a functional component is just as beneficial as having like a normal component. I think anytime you can write a process once and not have to continuously rewrite code, I think that's always the best option you could ever go for.
And deal with that state everywhere, and I mean that's the main benefit for me is I mean anything that doesn't have side effects or I don't have to think about how variables are changing throughout the execution of the code. Is super helpful in terms of just making everything just simplified.
Yeah, and I think it's also nice because when you're needing to make an adjustment with those components, it's always easy to find.
Right.
You know exactly where you're going and where you're looking, and then you can just adjust it in that one spot. And I think that's always
it's modularized in a way that
for me it's the same as learning about CSS. When I found out about CSS, it's about compartmentalizing this certain part of your experience and only having to adjust one place. I think it's a very beneficial and beautiful thing.
Cool. So we're gonna
specific file you want it open?
No. All right, we're back on, and we're now looking at Punchout. Can you maybe describe Punchout a little bit here? Once again, sure. I have to compliment Andrew just immensely right off the bat here. This is just so gorgeous. Looking like if you were to dive into this file right here and look at everything, look at what's going on, there is no question that everything here is intentional and that it was well thought out and that it is meant to be there. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a code base and it's just a scrambled mess, and well, you don't know, okay, was this meant to be used? Is this line of code ever going to be executed? I mean, can I pull this out and the entire application will run the exact same way? And it's just so easy to read and it's well structured, and I really have to compliment you on all of this right here.
I think one of the dangers is sometimes you'll write things not in the right place because you'll realize, oh, well, I need to add my routes or something like that. And so you'll be down here and you'll add the routes. And I tend to try to keep them in the same place so that I know where I'm looking for them and I know what I need. And I also tend to go back. Every
time you need to change a route, mess with a route, add a route, it's all in the same spot. You don't have you don't need to think. You don't have to go sift through it. You don't have to Control F. Oh, let me search for Express in here and go find everything. And then anytime anyone else jumps in the code, oh, Andrew wrote this file. Oh, I know it's going to be super clean and easy to navigate around. Like that's such a huge thing when you're working on a team. Or 6 months from now, oh, I know exactly how I like to structure all of these files. I know exactly where I need to dive into, and it's super easy to read. And so all right, let's talk about Punch-Out and what Punch-Out is and sort of some of the technologies you
Sure.
use. And
do you want me to share the website?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay, let me get that up for you, and I'll share that. While I'm doing that, I can explain. So Punch-Out is a web app for people who play Punch-Out and stream Punch-Out in a speedrunning manner. Boy, did I say that in a weird way. So if you don't know what speedrunning a video game is, it's the trying to beat a game as fast as possible. And one of the ways we keep track of that in the speedrunning community is one of the ways we keep track of that in the speedrun community is by making what's called a splitter, and it will keep track of each little section. So in this example, it'd be like each fight, and you put in what your time was, and then it will let you know if you're faster than you used to your best time, or if you're slower than your best time. It gives you kind of an idea of where you're at and what you're trying to like if you're trying to. It keeps track of where you're at and whether or not you're going to beat your best time.
Right.
So those are what splitters are called. So I made it for a online app for you to keep track with a splitter, and also over here there's a separate page you can go to that basically has, right now you'll see it's blank, but it will keep track of this for streaming. So it basically just puts your splitter on your stream without any of this other stuff.
Right,
so
right.
It basically just listens to whether or not you've started, and once you've started, it pulls it up. So
how did you get into building something like this?
So basically my process on this was, what do I need? What are the speedrunners going to want? What can we do to make this easy for everyone as possible? I could just made it for one game. I decided to make it for all 3 of the Punch-Out games. It gives you the ability to like track your times. Also, they're like different. Like, I don't know why this is set up like that right now. There are different options you can have for what you want to put on the screen. For example, when I start, we'll say Punch-Out for the Wii, and we'll start it. Oh no, we need to be 80%, and we'll start. So that's the category. So once it starts, it's going to pull up all the information, and this is what you'll see on your stream. But let's say you don't really want all the fighters' information individually. You can just get rid of the individual info, and you don't really care to tell what kind of game it is. Everyone knows. So this is one of my favorites. It's like the tiny little box, so you just have it in the top of your screen. So basically, you'll put in what your time is. You can put when you knock them down if you want, but you'll just put in your time. So let's say it took me 45 seconds. We'll say it took 45.34 to do, right? So then we'll move on to the next fighter, and you'll see that my time right now is 45.34. If you had the individual info, you could see that it was 45.34 here.
Cool. So let's jump back into some of the code and maybe walk through how this works.
Yeah.
Jump back over into Visual Studio. I think that's what is that what you're using? Yeah, everyone uses this.
I eventually came to it. I was using something else. I don't remember the name of it at the moment, but I do like this. So you'll see I have a state here that has quite a bit of stuff in it, including default splits. So I just kind of put those in by hand. So this is just the information it's going to grab if it needs to grab if you've never played the game before. Otherwise, it's going to be reading Mongo, getting your information from the database. So it's a pretty deep state here. So when it mounts, we're going to update the splitter. So we're going to take the splits that we have and we're going to break them apart. And then we're going to send that information to
just to socket
IO, which will then send that information to the other page.
Yeah, I've never actually used socket in any sort of web app. I've only used it in the context of an iOS app.
Yeah. So basically, it will blast it back out to the other page, and if the other page is open, it will get that information has changed, and it will update accordingly, kind of stuff. So then you'll have your different part, like to get the games. So we're just going to call the API, and we're going to get whatever game is being picked.
Right.
And then we're going to set the state to that.
So that API object we can maybe get into.
Sure.
I'm guessing you wrote that, and we can maybe get into some of that here in a little bit.
Well, if you want, we can go. Just remind me. I'll go back to that. I can show you how my API's page works. So it's basic stuff. You have your game select, category select. I wrote a ready check to make sure. So I did a case, like a switch case, to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, and if not, it won't start. Like for example, when I tried to start, but I hadn't selected the category yet, it wouldn't start. And we get into the real.
So those are you just sort of enumerated through the various possibilities and.
So these are for all the buttons, like the play button, the previous button. So it's checking to make sure it's different things. Like on the previous button, is there a previous to go to? If not, then we don't want that button to be highlighted. We want it to be shut down.
Yeah.
Next button is checking to see if all the information is there that needs to be there before it moves on. Same kind of things. Like if you want to expand, I didn't show you it expanding, but if you wanted to expand, it has to make sure it started, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And again, the way this is visually lined up, I have to compliment you. It's so neat and clean and easy to look at.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for the compliment. So that's basically my ready checks for all the buttons. Then we're going to get into the heart of the matter, which does a lot of different things. One of the things that really took me a while to fully understand was like cloning data, getting a deep clone opposed to a surface clone, and being able to work with different arrays and objects without changing the original one.
So you're talking about like value assignments versus reference assignments?
Yeah. So basically, anytime you would change something in, you would want to change something in one. Let me think of the best way I can explain it. You'd want to check to see if something's the same as something else. But if you change it in the array, it automatically changes in the base array. So it'll never be like a clone of something. It will never be an exact copy of something.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, once again, we're calling the API to get the new splits out. We're creating the new splits. We're putting all the information for the users. You can see we're grabbing the split info from the state and put all the info into the display. So then we're putting everything where it needs to be, add the game title category, add the fighters, add the personal bests. Then it's grabbing the results, and basically this is grabbing everything that you need for your splitter, and then as you go on, so yeah, you can see input change, looks for specific values, saving submit. But you'll see that like when you go to next, it will check for specific things, like if it's a high score category is a different kind of category. So it will do a different thing. Basically, it will take that time, put it through a time converter, which is at the end here. So like these different things, like, so it says delta, that's the difference between your two previous splits. So it will grab your PB splits, your personal best splits, in case you don't know PB is, and it will basically run them together and find out where it's at, and it'll either put a negative or a plus if you're ahead or behind, all that kind of stuff. It's looking to see if you're behind or ahead and by how much. And same thing for a gold check. A gold check is basically saying if it's the fastest you've ever done. So it goes into your personal best splits, and if the time's faster than the gold split, it will then save that to your splits, and it will so it connects to it will connect to your server or database and update splits and all that stuff, and then update the state. I'm seeing now that there are a lot of console logs that I can probably get rid of.
I mean, it's not bad.
Like I put a lot of console logs.
Crash testing.
Yeah, and that's basically why they're there. And then I apparently never remembered to go take them out.
I mean, if it's not in super heavy production, I don't think it really matters. It's not the most.
It's not going to slow a lot of stuff down. But yeah, you can see when time converts start. So basically, time convert will take. I wanted to make sure that no matter how you put the time in. So if you wanted to represent 2 minutes as 120, you could put that in and it would still read that the same as if you put 2 minutes in. So I just wanted to make sure that stuff. So it has to convert it and invert it for all the different things.
So let's talk about, well, there's the actual render method. Can you maybe talk about this a little bit, and then we'll dive into some of the API stuff?
Sure. So a lot of the front end stuff, you'll see I have done all this, like I've done all the logic stuff, and then I'll have different components. Like I have an icon component so that I can just reuse putting icons in instead of having to put in all the code for each icon. And then I have different components here for different sections, like the fighters at the top, the game select section. And I'll be passing along some of that data to it in the props. Then you'll just see it's all my buttons and then just those components again. So a lot of times it's just about, it'll map out. So and let's say there's 22 fighters in it, so we'll go through all 22 fighters and put those fighters into the DOM. So like the section that showed all the fighters is just this one individual component 22 times, basically.
Right. Well, so can we look at that fighter?
Look at the fighter component?
Yeah.
Sure.
What that looks like. It's the beauty of React. I think it's up top.
Let me see. There it is. It was right under where I was looking. So,
fighter.js.
So this is my fighter component. Basically, there's a couple of things I didn't hear. Oh, I was trying to figure out what this is the background. When it comes out, you want to be able to distinguish between each line, so it's not all one color. So the background, it returns a different class, basically, based on whether it's an odd or an even number. And if it's a current one, like if it's the split, the fighter that you're on and the thing is the fighter matches the fighter on the list, it actually, will add in current, which will make it a blue background. I was trying to be like, what? But that's what that is. So basically, we're going to take the props from the controller, and we're just going to go through and add in. So we've got the image. So then we've got the prop fighters icon, which will change based upon, what when it's mapping through. And then we'll put that out. We've got the input type, which has all this specific information. So your knockdown 1, you've got your on change for when you change. If you change it in 1, it changes it in all. Disable check. So this is that you won't be able to do something if it's not on that current round. So basically, I didn't want people to be able to type in anything anywhere. So unless you are on that round or behind or past that round, then you can't type in it. And then, you know, your max length kind
of.
So
let's jump down. Is there a render method here?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Never mind. Let's dive into the API stuff.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what you were asking about the render method.
We only got a few minutes left here.
Okay, so we'll just jump to the API real quick. So this is the API side for the React. So we're just gonna use Axios, and then we're just directing it. So you can see the APIs for the users, the games, the fighter, the splits, and the authentication for Twitch. Because you have to sign in through Twitch. We can get through that. So you can, these will have a different thing. For example, if you're going to, you know, update the splits or save splits, you know, we're gonna do it differently. So we are grabbing those, or we're sending to those, and those are gonna be back here where my controllers are. So for example, we'll go as my splits controller, and you'll see that I have all the different controllers for my Mongo here, which correlate with that end spot.
Right, and these are the actual functionality that.
Yes, these are when you call.
Right.
When you call that, it sends to this.
Right. I really like the way you split those up.
And then this is the schema for the splits themselves, so you can see the different
like data types in there and stuff.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So, but like the controllers, I like the controllers just because it makes it easier to.
I mean, it just pulls things apart, and it
just makes. If I need to do something for the fighters controller, then it's right here. Like if I need to find them all or find by a specific name, I can do that.
And you need to add a little more. You need to add more functionality at some point. Whatever, you just throw it right in there, and it's super explicit and clear what the point is.
Yeah, and then Axios is the way for. It's basically like the React Ajax function for calling that API data. So we're basically just setting up in this API file the different calls, and then when you're on that different page, so for example that controllers page, and then you do an API call. So you're doing API get games. You're doing. I should have just let that open. You're doing the API get games here. So this is what it's sending to. So it's sending to API dot, you know, it's sending to your backend. So it's sending to my controller at API games, and it calls the controller. The controller says, okay, you want to find all the games? Here you go. And so it runs from the database game. So then it goes to, I know this is all obvious stuff, but so then it goes to here and gets all it uses this schema to grab all that information from the database and send it all the way back.
Cool. Well, I think there's a lot of code here. So, I mean,
there's a lot. It's,
it's well organized, and
that's why
probably another hour kind of diving through this project. I kind of wanted to give a high level overview of how you write code and how you think about organization, which I really do think you do a really nice job on, both in terms of on the file level and then the project level, pulling just every bit of functionality out and having that super organized. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I sounded like I was going to cut you off there, but.
Oh, no.
Cool. Well, we're pushing an hour right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the